Hey everybody, we're here for our first mini lecture. I'll talk a little bit about some of the material, some of the weekly readings, and then the planned mini lecture was on free data analysis software tools. It'll give us a chance to explore a few things. You have to bear with me. Zoom isn't all that great flipping between screens, so there will be some pauses here while I bring up new screens. Sorry, my PowerPoint. There we go. All right, the first article was by Samin Vazir, who is currently at University of California, Davis, and will soon be faculty at the University of Melbourne in Australia, I believe. I think the main point of this article was that psychology historically does a really bad job with transparency. And that's something that really surprised, I think should be surprising to everybody, as most fields, most scientific fields are pretty open with their research, whereas psychology's kind of had a history of being very closed off. It's been an APA standard that people have to share their data with, and have to meet reasonable requests to share data. However, in practice, that's been very difficult to get people to even show you their data, much less make them publicly available. I think Vazir takes an interesting view in saying that there's really nothing wrong with what we've been doing. P-hack all you want, report only the clean results. That's fine, so as long as we're transparent and honest and there's some record showing we're doing X, Y, and Z. I liked her analogy here. She likened it to Carfax. Carfax is something where you get all the information about a used car's history before you buy it. Very much we want to have something like that for our research. We want to know what the different analyses were, what different things people tried out. So with all of that in mind, as guidance to help evaluate articles, she presents a few minimum requirements. The first would be that all raw data on which the scientific claims are based should be available. So should study plan, design plans, analysis plans, predictions made before collecting data. And if none were made, simply making clear that that was the case. Presenting all of the relevant studies that were attempted and their outcomes. We saw previously, I think in the John article, that it's quite common for people to conduct multiple studies and only report the ones that worked. She also calls for reporting all data exclusions and transformations. I think that's getting at if you tossed people from your study, if you eliminated people for a certain reason, be explicit as to why you did that. Also, having those raw data available will allow people to go in and see if that had any effect on your analyses or your findings. And then reporting all alternative models and analyses that were tested. I think what she means here is, if you did 40 different analyses, you need to report on all of those, and you need to let people know, okay, I did this 40 different ways. One way that I set it up gave me something that the other 39 didn't. That would give you a lot more context to understanding the sort of contribution that you're looking at, as opposed to something where they only tested one specific model and that one did work. So again, these requirements are there so that we can better evaluate science, so we can better evaluate what people are doing. Now, one thing I wanted to mention in that article, Samin mentioned the StatCheck program. There's a web page here for StatCheck. You can either use that or you can use it through R. What StatCheck is it's a program that automatically will flag questionable statistical findings. The basic idea behind it is that it takes a test statistic, whether that's a T, a Z, or F, or a chi-square, along with the associated degrees of freedom. Well, there's no degrees of freedom for Z, but it takes what it needs from the article and calculates a probability value. It then compares that to the reported probability value, and it flags inconsistencies. Interestingly, when this was released, it was used to analyze all preprints printed that were listed on a specific preprint server, and it found errors in something like 30% of them. Now, some of them are small errors, just isn't like an inexact value being presented, but other times it's a very clear error, sometimes even an error that would result in failing to reject the null hypothesis, where it had been previously reported that you could reject the null hypothesis. For those of you writing theses, it's a really outstanding tool. So I wanted to just demonstrate its use for a second. Let me stop sharing this screen and go to web page here. All right. So this is StatCheck, or the web version of StatCheck. It's very simple to use. You simply go and you browse, find a file. I'm going to use this article here. This is an article that was recently submitted to Analyses of Social Issues and Public Policy, the journal that I edit. It uploads it very quickly, and then as we scroll down, it will give us a listing of the different statistical results and whether they are consistent or inconsistent with what's been reported. So we've got the computed t-value over here. We've got the reported p-value over here, and we have some some places where there's inconsistencies. Oftentimes it's just rounding stuff, but there are places, for example, this one right here, where the authors present a value as having a probability of less than 0.01, but the probability actually recalculated is 0.03. So it looks like they made an error there. It wouldn't make a difference in terms of whether they could reject the null or not, but definitely an error nonetheless. See, it does this for all of the different results, and it also notes whether it's consistent or not. I find this a really useful tool. I apply it to students' theses, and generally I find some errors. Keep in mind, if you're simply transposing results, if you're running analyses and then typing in, the statistical values, very easy to make a mistake, to transpose numbers wrong. Really nice tool for catching that. So I encourage you, especially those of you who are doing theses, to check this out. All right, let me go back to the slides. This is what's a little clunky about using this technology, is that we need to unshare and then reshare stuff to go back and forth. All right, that's not working. There we go. All right, the other article that we talked about was by Brian Nosek. It was on promoting an open research culture. This is really a very influential article. I'll talk about how influential that was. It proposed standards for journals, and it encouraged publishers and journals to adopt those standards. I've worked with these standards in my editorial role. I found that the Center for Open Science, the organization that Brian Nosek runs, and the organization that host these standards, I found that they really made it very easy for outlets to adopt standards, so easy that they actually rewrote our author guidelines to be in line with the standards that we wanted. I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences with that in the next mini lecture. They also created a ranking system for journals that address how well journals do to embrace those standards. So I thought we could take a look at the actual standards for a second, and then also we could move to taking a look at the TOP factor. And again, I've got to change my sharing here. All right, so here are the, oh, yeah, let me give you a different, one. Here are the transparency and openness standards themselves. You can see that there's levels that range from 0 to 3. Level 3 basically just says, hey, we encourage you to do this, or says nothing. It's basically no, really no real requirement there. I think we can, the most relevant ones, I think, are data transparency, methods transparency, materials design analysis. Data transparency is probably the most controversial of these standards, as some people are just really resistant to sharing their data. We see here level 0 means the journal could say, hey, we'd like you to do this, or it says nothing. Level 1 just requires authors to state whether the data are publicly available, and if so, where to access them. Pretty light standard, although as I'll talk about next week, that can be something that people maybe see negatively. Level 2, data must be posted in a trusted repository. So here's a standard saying you've got to have the data available, and there's exceptions available. There's exceptions to that rule that must be identified in the article if you do not have your data available. And then finally, level 3, data has to be posted and reported, and analyses that were reported have to be reproduced independently before things are published. So not only is the data available, but also people are reproducing the analyses to make sure everything is right. I'd say, level 3 is probably a pretty deep standard, probably one that's a little bit unrealistic, given the sort of resources that people have available to them. But pretty extreme standard, although there are a few journals that do adopt that. Other things that we see, we've got standards around pre-registration. That's something that we'll talk about next week, pre-registration and registered reports. You can see we have standards about methods, about sharing of materials, all basically follow the same pattern. Level 0 is nothing. Level 1, you simply have to state it. Level 2, you have to give it, but there's maybe some reason for exception. For example, if you're using a copyrighted scale, obviously you can't make that publicly available. And then level 3 being, again, the most extreme. All right, let's take a look at one more piece here. First, the transparency and openness guidelines. This is, let's go to current signatories here, just to show you how widely adopted these are. You can see that there's now over 5,000 signatories. Over 5,000 signatories to this. So very widely adopted standard. If we just look at journals in psychology, keeping in mind that there are many, many more fields involved here, we can just kind of scroll down this list and see just the scope of the journals that are currently using these standards. You can see it's a pretty wide range of studies, and there's quite a few of them, even some published by the American Psychological Association, like Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology, very, very good journal. So you can see there's a lot of journals here, again, over 5,000 in total that have adopted this standard since this article came out a few years ago. So that's a really, really positive thing. In terms of different organizations, you can see that the Association for Psychological Science has signed on to this. The American Psychological Association has not. Different societies have different reasons for whether they sign on or not. All right. Another piece to take a look at. Recently, the Center for Open Science released a TOP, the TOP score, or the TOP factor, Transparency and Openness Standards factor. And what this is that they ranked a number of journals in terms of where they fell in terms of transparency and openness based on their standards, and they gave them a score. Basically, this corresponds to which level of standard they might have, and the scores are totaled. This includes, again, much more than psychology journals, so we can just search on psychology, or I'll just search on social. Social psychology is where I do most of my work, and you can see we have some range, comprehensive results in social psychology. That's a journal that's going to score very high because it only publishes a certain kind of article. It publishes a registered report. Social Psychological Bulletin is a newer journal that's open access. Then we get to some of the more traditional journals. You can see Journal of Experimental Social Psychology is pretty high. The journal called Social Psychology. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology recently has moved toward a stronger standard. Analyses of Social Issues and Public Policy, journal that I edit, is up there as well, not as high as I would like, but is up there. And then you can scroll through, and you can do this for whatever field you're interested in. You can see kind of where everything falls. One thing that you'll see is that there are a fair number of outlets that aren't doing anything, that still have a 0 score, but there are outlets that are doing encouraging things. All right, so let's go back to our mini lecture piece. Oops, sorry, I'm sharing the wrong piece. All right. All right. So that's a bit on the readings. I hope that people are still having discussion on Canvas. The readings, I'll jump in and ask a few more questions in the next around today and maybe tomorrow, so we can have a broader discussion around these 2 articles. So I just wanted to give a brief overview here. The other thing I wanted to do is I want to talk about some free tools with data analysis. I think that this is that the value of this is now even stronger, given that we're all at home and don't have access to university computers, maybe don't have access to commercial software packages. So there are a few programs I wanted to mention. R, of course, I'm not going to talk about R, as many people in the class are already R users, and I know that that there's a number of people who are taking introduction to R courses and things like that to improve their skills. Certainly a very, very valuable skill that leads to great employment opportunities. There's also a couple of newer free programs that will provide that both provide graphical interfaces that are built on R code, but give you more of a point-and-click environment. And I wanted to mention these as I think that they're a nice option for those of you who've maybe previously relied on SPSS or other point-and-click programs. They provide similar functionality, but they're not going to have the learning curve. The same learning curve as R. So if you need to do something quickly and you don't have that R background, these 2 programs are good options, and they've got a lot of nice stuff in them. Those programs are JASP and Jamovi, and I'll talk about them briefly and then just show you a little bit of a demo of each. First, a JASP software, and you can download either of these programs freely just by searching JASP software, Jamovi software. JASP has 2 specific goals. I really like these goals. They strike me as being very punk rock. To liberate academia from expensive proprietary statistical software such as SPSS. And then the other goal is to provide Bayesian statistical methods in an accessible and user-friendly way. I won't talk much about Bayesian methods, but aside from saying that these are methods that have traditionally been the realm of those who have really, really deep statistical knowledge, and they've always been really hard to do because you've got some real eggheads who are working in these fields for whom writing 7,000 lines of code isn't a problem. The goal here is to provide a nice interface, getting at kind of some of their core beliefs and core values. Here's a nice little excerpt from an interview with their former lead developer, Jonathan Love, who is actually the author of the other program we'll talk about, Jamovi. The question in that interview was, how can JASP stay up to date with state-of-the-art statistical methods, even when borrowing implementations written in R and the like? They always have to be implemented by you in JASP. Is there a solution to this problem? And the answer was, well, if SPSS has taught us anything, you really don't need to stay up to date to be a successful statistical product. Anyway, I like his response there. Let me go on over to JASP just to give you a brief look at the program. So here's JASP. Again, JASP lets you know right up front, it's free, it's user-friendly, and it's pretty flexible. If you want to use JASP, you can get started pretty quickly just by opening a file. I'm going to open a file that it's on my computer. Or maybe I'll just open one of theirs. Here's a file called Big 5 Personality Traits. You've got the 5 factors and people's scores on each of these 5 factors. A lot of different things that we can do. This, we can run descriptive statistics rather easily just by grabbing these, moving them over, and you'll see the descriptive statistics pop up. You've got means, standard deviations, and so on. You can make graphs quite quickly. Graphs of correlations, for example. Oops. Box plots, for some reason, those aren't. Oops. You can get different statistics, percentiles. Oh, I'm sorry. My graphs were running a little slow. Let's let those pop up. You can see the little thing right next to descriptive statistics is telling you it's running something. So here we go. Here are our graphs. We've got our distribution graphs. We've got graphs of correlations, all kinds of nice stuff here. Anyway, relatively easy to use. You've got a whole host of different analyses. You've got t-tests, both regular and Bayesian, ANOVA, regression, frequencies, factor analysis approaches. Also, there's a lot of machine learning approaches here. If any of you are interested in data science, machine learning is one of the big techniques, and JASP offers a lot of value there. All right, let me go back and talk a little bit more about JASP, and then we'll move on to Jamovi. All right. The other thing I wanted to mention about JASP is if you're interested in getting started with it, it provides a lot of tutorials, blogs, workshop materials, training videos. They've really developed a lot of content, which is really, really useful. And the people providing that content are really good at explaining stuff. So I'm really impressed with what they've done there. They do have a strong focus on Bayesian approaches and machine learning. This may or may not be of interest to you, but if it is, you can definitely check out those pieces. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about Jamovi, another free program. The Jamovi team actually began at JASP. And the big difference between JASP and Jamovi is that JASP has a team of developers working on developing and extending resources for JASP, whereas Jamovi is much more community-driven, much like R. People contribute packages to Jamovi, so much of that development is happening with experts developing things to do the sort of analyses that they're most interested in. Jamovi also does not stand for something. JASP does not stand for anything. Jamovi does not stand for anything either. Jamovi is not an acronym. It's most definitely always lowercase, so they even have a philosophy about the acronym here. We'll take a look at Jamovi real briefly as well, just to kind of show you its functionality. It looks a lot like JASP, primarily because the lead team are the ones who developed JASP. So we can open some data, and they have a data library. I'll again open. Sorry, I was trying to open a different set. They also have a data set, Big 5 data set. It's probably the same data set as in JASP. You can see that we can explore the data and get descriptive statistics for our neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness. Those pop up. Got our sample sizes, our means, our standard deviations. We can get all kinds of different pieces. We could examine shape, data, skew, kurtosis, that sort of thing. We can do t-test, ANOVA, t-test options, ANOVA options. regression options, frequencies, and factor analysis. Just like with JASP, one of the different pieces here that I really like is that they have what are called modules. And if you click the Jamovi library, you'll see that there are contributed modules here. There's a module, for example, for power analysis, a module for mediation, for Bayesian methods. All of these different models, all of these different modules are developed either by the JASP team, the Jamovi team, or the Jamovi, or are contributed. So a lot of really good stuff developing here. A lot of folks have been working to create modules for doing analyses within Jamovi. So there's one for meta-analysis, which is very, very good if you're working in that field. So kind of a different philosophy here. JASP is developing stuff on their own. Jamovi is a combination of developing some things on their own and relying on users to contribute things, much like the R model. All right, couple last points before we go. As a few reminders, I want to remind everybody to be sure to complete the remaining assignments and course requirements. If you haven't seen those yet, they're detailed in the pinned discussion section on Canvas. I like to use the discussion section rather than the announcements because it's more flexible in terms of actually getting comments on those things. In a nutshell, probably the biggest things you have left are going to be your skill building, the skill building assignment, and then also your presentation, which you'll be recording via Zoom. There's more details on Canvas, so please do refer to that. And finally, wash your hands, socially distance, be well. All right, I'll talk to you, well, I will talk at you soon.